Because people think that they're going to run out of problems. And, like, let's be honest. Are, have you ever run out of problems?
Welcome to the Better Batch podcast, where batch process manufacturers learn from industry experts. I'm Alex Kovis.
And I'm Peter Suttard, and we're joined today with Katie Gezon, who is an expert in process change in facilities. We're so lucky to have her. Katie, what kind of companies bring you in?
Any type of company that's fucked up, which would include a lot of people, right? So, you know, there's anything that has to do with manufacturing and process, right? Which, to be honest, you could process map making lunch or meal prepping. So anything, everything.
And you split, do you work with small companies exclusively, large companies, medium? What does that look like?
I work with a gamut of people, so it just depends on what their needs are. So I do have very small businesses that are looking to make the jump from small to medium to large. And then I also work with larger organizations that are looking to process improve that just don't have the bandwidth or the talent in-house, and they would like to have someone come in and do it for them.
Sure.
Cool.
How do you split? How do you split kind of between small, medium is great. I haven't heard that word before. Small, medium.
Oh yeah, that's my technical term.
Sure. So where do you kind of draw that line?
So small for me would be anybody who is $3 million in revenue or under. And I use that number because 3 million to the average Joe seems like a lot of money, but that's just enough money to not make money, right? So if you have employees, if you have other things. Now, if you're like a business of one and you're making 3 million and your overhead is your garage, great. You're probably doing really well. If you have other employees so that you're not the only person, then $3 million, you're not taking home a paycheck. So that's your small size. And then from there, medium, which is, obviously on your way to growth. So medium would be somewhere between 5 and 10. To be honest, a comfortable medium is above 10. And then we're getting to large when we're talking 50 to 100 million.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And actually, on those revenue kind of categorizations, something I've always thought about is like if a company is purely a contract manufacturer, then that revenue maybe goes further than if they're a brand. Where as a brand, right? So when you're thinking those numbers, are you thinking like contract manufacturer, like a wholesale?
Yeah, I would still include contract manufacturing if only because you could be a brand and have your products co-packed and then not have the overhead of staff, right? Like maybe you have one salesperson, one ops person, right? But when you're a co-packer, right, I have the staff who generally likes to get paid regardless if we're running or not. And so that overhead has to be associated. And so to be honest, co-packers are a lot of my bread and butter because they have so many changeovers, so many batches, so many processes, right? And so being being shitty at process isn't an option because that's where you make money.
Right. Yeah, being able to do quick turns faster and faster.
So what generally prevents companies from moving from small to medium to medium? Is there a general rule or is it different every time?
So I found generally it has to do with the mentality and the culture of the actual business. And a lot of times when you're a startup and you're a mom and pop, right? It's like cut your teeth, everybody does everything, get it all done. Doesn't matter how it gets done, get to the finish line. Migrating from that mindset into a mindset where you're building process, where you actually have to think about, hey, Bob is going to go on vacation next week, and we need processes built so that Julie can step in for Bob, right? Whereas when you're a mom and pop, you're like, okay, well, mom and pop do everything. So it's a mentality. So it's changing from putting all the focus on just having warm bodies and humans and then building it into build a process so you can develop your talent to build processes, right? Like I don't need an expert forklift driver. I need someone who knows how to map out the shipping process so that they can train 10 people behind them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And is it the same type of shift then from medium onwards, or now are we getting into more of like here's that like technical know-how?
So in my opinion, I think The small to medium is going to be a culture change where you're actually focusing on process. The medium to large, once you're a medium, to actually stay medium, because there's plenty of small businesses that have blips, right? Costco comes on, they have 1 year, it's a killer year, and they're like, oh, we're headed to the moon. Except that they're not, because then next year Costco's like, yeah, sorry. And those businesses are not built on a sustainable foundation. So to be a consistent medium-sized business, you have to have a sustainable foundation. So once that box is checked, then from medium to large, you're looking at how do I optimize my sustainable foundation.
Yeah.
Cool.
Feels like a lot of companies will never make that jump from small to medium. That culture shift will just be too big a hurdle to jump over.
Absolutely. It's so I'll give you an example. At one point I was in the process of automating a production facility, and we went from 23 employees to 6. Now, keep in mind, of those 23 employees, there was 6 core employees who were there rain or shine, and then all of your extra people were temps, right? Who were brought in ad hoc, like as needed. And because you go into a business, right, and you say, well, I'm going to cut my employees, by 75%, and the first response is, ooh, and it's like, okay, but in reality, I would rather pay those 6 people twice what I can pay them on 23 people, and then I can actually develop them as humans and focus on them as humans and cut all my HR issues by 75%.
The transition from, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening, to go from 6 core staff and to be able to trim out all of the temp staff. I mean,
Yep.
walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so in reality, so I will tell you it was a culture change, and it was, of course, a shock to the employees, right? Because they're, of course, worried about, am I going to have a job? Well, yes, you're going to have a job, because I would rather have less of you, pay you more, and develop you as a human, right? So then you have certain positions, and the goal is really like, how do I cross train everybody so that they can function in every single location? Because I have taken, Bob is an expert filler operator, and he runs the filler like this, and it's always set up like this, and these are always his set points. Well, great, Bob. Let's get all your set points. Let's use those as best practices, set that as standard. So Julie behind you can also run it the same way. And so it's changing the mindset to, I'm just a doer with hands, to I'm a brain. I brought in people to think, right? So I'm going to give you basics on how to troubleshoot, basics on how to run, and here's, the equipment generally, and here's an SOP because we built processes, and you're good to go.
And when you're making those kinds of changes, you obviously start off dealing with management or, ownership, and they're bringing you in for one reason. And then when you hit the ground, it sounds like maybe they don't realize this culture shift is needed, or,
Yep.
Their vision of what's happening in the factory and what the solution will be may be different from what you kind of then say to them. Is that true? And how do you kind of overcome that?
So what I've found, so back when I started, I background in mechanical engineering. So I started with Anheuser-Busch, and when they bring on engineers, they bring them on to manage the floor. So when I started, I actually worked in a facility. So in my head, this is how I kind of constrain it. But the manufacturing was on the first level. The second level was kind of like middle management, like kind of all the managers and stuff. And then you had C-suite on the top floor, right? And so you would get called up to the top floor, once a month, once a quarter, whatever, do the SMT or the senior management team meetings or the C-suite meetings. And a lot of times the message was the same upstairs and below, but the delivery was different, right? So the C-suite information, right, what their goals and their objectives were, right, generally to reduce costs, reduce waste, and of course everybody's got the safety quality, right, or at least they should. Come on, guys. But those people, they know what they want and they're going towards the same objective, but they don't actually know how to relay that message back to those people on the floor, right? Like when I started, I was managing people that were my parents' age and were technical experts, right? And so I come in and I'm like, hey, well, let's systemize this. Let's put a process in. And they're like, oh, hell no, you're going to take my job. You're going to, like, my knowledge is my power. And I'm like, no, no, no. You're, you are now a technical expert in this thing. You will always be a technical expert, right? I had a guy who was a seamer for seaming cans, a technical expert. I'm like, great. So put them in a position where they can actually manage their own data, track their own data, and try to make improvements. And it ends up going to the same direction that the C-suite wants, but the C-suite, said, well, this is actually they don't know how to break it down to the floor level. So they're not really aware of what's causing their issues. And it's, take a sledgehammer and just bang on the desk and, hey, this is what we need, do it.
Yeah, yeah. So interesting, and kind of feels like that information flow breaks down both ways, right? Like I know I've seen, operators often like hold a solution or an opportunity, and at least from their perspective, management won't listen. Like, do you have kind of like a approach to starting to get those messages also to go, from operators to management and have them actioned, or like as an operator, how would you advise them?
Yeah.
So I always end up in an interesting position, right? Because people bring me in, I cost money, right? Like, I'm not just walking around, and because I'm expensive, like, it a lot of times I get the ear of somebody who may have heard the same message, but I can coat that message in a different way or frame it differently, and I get a different response, right? And so a lot of times what my goal is, and most organizations should be built like a pyramid, right? Like if you have more C-suite people than you have operators on the floor, buddy, you got a problem, right? So that being said, with all of your workforce down below, you need to enable your workforce to make decisions at that level, at the lowest level, right? This is, I did time with a union, and that was always the goal, right? Resolve everything at the lowest level, right? So it's just like, as a parent, you've got kids, right? If you teach your kid to make a sandwich, right, then every time they're hungry, it's like, bro, you got this. Like, go figure it out. Go make a sandwich. Like, yeah, I don't need to make the sandwich for you. You can handle it, solve your own problems. So it's giving them the authority to make their own decisions to impact their own life, which their life within the manufacturing process, and to give them the resources. So a lot of times, I've paired equipment operators, so people who are subject matter experts in their specific area. So maybe they're a packer operator, filler operator, such. And I put them with a maintenance person, because a lot of times that maintenance person is responsible for those areas. And like it or not, that if that equipment's not running, that maintenance person's getting called nonstop. So they would much rather collaboratively work with the operator so that they know, hey, I come in at 7 a.m., we check these 10 things, we make sure everything is to set point, and then I go get my coffee break and my cigarette at 7:30, and I'm good till 8:30 when I have a meeting, right? So, how do you create the advantage, and how do you create the tools so that those people can solve it? Like, do you need my permission to tell you to make an adjustment so that the fills are correct? No, you got it. You're the expert. I'm going to ask you anyways.
Sure. How do you navigate that part of, the change management piece where operators don't want, they're like, I'm going to get fired. If I tell you how to set up this packaging line and I write it down, you don't need me anymore, I'm fired, I'm out of here. There's a pretty common fear, everywhere. How do you navigate that? How do you move that along?
So it's two pieces. And change management, I would say, is probably one of the toughest things. And most people are pretty terrible at it, right? Because let's be honest, change is uncomfortable. Like, we don't want to change. Like, I don't want to change my diet. Like, why do I have to do that? Do I have to lose weight today? Like, no, that's change. That hurts. So a lot of times it's showing, look, we would like to invest in the quality of person and bring you and elevate you so that we can have 3 Peters instead of 10. Because if I have 10 Peters, I still have the same budget for payroll. Yeah, 10. Yeah, what are we going to do? Uh, but you can make the argument, but anybody would understand, right? Like, okay, my bucket of money for salaries is X. If I have across 10 or across 3, right? Like, I could pay you more, and I can develop your skill sets, and you can become we can focus less on you just becoming an expert in the machine. Instead of working on the day-to-day fires, you're working on the week-to-week fires. So you are now not telling me, about adjusting fills. Instead, you're saying, hey, we need to do this systematically. I think there's actually an issue. Or you can check trending and all these other things. And at the end of the day, it makes their lives easier. But it is a challenge, and you do have to figure out where those people stand and what's value added for them, right? Because you have some people who they have a knowledge fear, which you just stated, and then you have other people who want to come into work, do their 40, clock out, and leave. But like, if you could make that easier for them, hell yeah, I'm on board.
We see the same thing on the purchasing with purchasers, where there'll be this day-to-day fires of like, we don't have sugar, or we do not have titanium dioxide, and we got to like scramble and fix production.
Yeah.
Once that is fixed, it's like, oh great, now I can renegotiate new prices. Like, there's other problems these really capable people could be working on. And so, let's do a bulk. Here's what we bought last year. Let's do a bulk purchase for next year. And now we've reduced costs by so much. Like, there's no shortage of problems for people to,
Yeah, that's always what I find interesting, because people think that they're going to run out of problems, and like, let's be honest, have you ever run out of problems?
Yeah, I've seen that quite a few times on implementations where, again, companies go from small to medium, and they'll very often have a lot of stuff in spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets work really well, but they usually have a human ERP who sits on those spreadsheets. Yeah. And then when we come in, and they kind of like, usually they're part of the system selection.
Well, and if anybody else touches those spreadsheets, they're jacked.
Oh, you're totally jacked. But then it slowly dawns on them, oh, we're bringing in this ERP, and actually operators on the floor will be directly entering the data. Gone will be the days that all the data flows in and out through me. They're not going to be submitting paperwork that I enter in my spreadsheet and then I ask a question and I give it back.
And I have to ask for counts every 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And that can be terrifying for the person in that role. And it's like very much, and you really have to educate them that actually you're going to get phenomenal powers, and like that like what you're doing like on top of that layer of like in and out data.
Well, because they're all working a level down, and you want them to be able to work a level up, and you just have to show them that there's a pathway to work up. It's like, you're doing when you have to ask for a count on inventory every 15 minutes before you order items, how much time do you spend doing that? And so if you show them, hey, so I'd like to make you actually a purchaser instead of the purchasing clerk, so that you could do optimizing the purchasing department, right? Like, those cost savings, like, you want to talk about actual value, purchasing clerks are easy to replace. Purchasing managers who optimize and renegotiate contracts and then can walk into an interview and say, these are the millions of dollars that I saved my last company because I set up a foundation and I could actually improve the process. Being a cog in the process is not as value added as improving the process. There's not the same return.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they can move from purchasing to procurement now, right? That kind of transfer.
Well, and they can go on vacation.
Right. Yeah. Or be
right. Like, who wants to go on vacation and not get a phone call all the time, or want to pull out their hair because they're afraid to come back to work?
Totally. Or not enjoy vacation because did they forget? Did I forget to order oil?
Things.
Oh my God. Yeah. Do we have the labels? Do we get blueberry labels?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the kid sandwich analogy, and where having instructed my kids how to make sandwich or do whatever else, the first couple rounds are bumpy. It's worse.
They're a little rough.
And it's got to be the same. It's got to be the same as you implement in a facility, go through this process management where things are going to have to slow down. How do you, there's all kinds of stuff there. How do you deal with that? Because you're going to have management who's like, obviously we want to change, but we still need to keep running at 105% production. Like, walk us through that.
So I think kind of what you hit on really, to be honest, is what a lot of the operators and the people on the floor end up dealing with, where they get a message from management that says, oh, safety, quality, production. Okay, these are the priorities, except when production's not running, right? So in reality, And it's the same message with process improvement, right? Oh, I walk out on the floor and I talk to people, and sometimes it's the first time, and they're like, "Oh, you're here to change the process?" Yeah, great. Like I've heard that for the last 5 years because the right effort and energy isn't put into it. And you're absolutely right. Anything that's a change is going to require you to take a step back, assess what you're doing, learning curve, right? And a lot of times, like if we're talking about like an ERP system or something like that, I have people do the paperwork that they're currently doing and the ERP system for 30 days. And then the reward is you nailed the ERP system in 30 days, you have no paper. And they're like, fuck yeah, let's get to no paper. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But you have to also convey back to management, and I'm in a unique position where because management brought me in, I can say, look, you guys say that you want to do these changes, you want to optimize, you want to create a sustainable solution, you want to go from small to medium, like you want to do all those things, and you say it, but your actions say something different, and all the people on the floor are not being given the time and the resources. So if that's truly your goal and your gauge, cool, let's do that. You're going to have to dedicate this amount of time. You're going to have to pull people off the floor. Production will take a hit, or you're going to have to do overtime so you can have a shift cover another shift. Or don't fucking hire me because it's a waste of money. Because I bringing me in to come fix your process, like I'm not going to be your filler operator. No, I'm working with your people. So like you're not training me. Like I know how to do this. Like I'm helping you guys figure out how to build your own futures.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you've brought in, the company is ready to accept the culture shift. They're ready to take a process approach. They invest the time and the energy. Okay. So what would you say, like, is there an order of priority, or is there like a typical like 1, 2, and 3 step approach that you would take to actually, make the changes needed now that they're accepted?
So a lot of times, if a company brings me in, I'll come in, I'll kind of do an assessment. I'll figure out what the stakeholders are saying. So stakeholders, fancy word, right, for any of our C-suite people, SMT, management, whatever you want to call them. And then I'll figure out what the people on the floor are saying. And based off that, we identify, they're on board. Management said, yeah, we're going to set aside the time. We're going to do all these things, right? And we're going to allocate the resources, because the resource isn't just me. Like, you don't bring me in and like change nothing else. And like, I'm like the secret sauce. Like, that's not how it works. Your people are the secret sauce. I'm just showing the secret sauce how to be the secret sauce. But I really, and it's going to be specific. Like sometimes I've had ERP systems be the linchpin. Other times it's been SOP, creating an entire control document. And basically, we have one person who is an expert in this machine. And it's like, great, can we get your brain down on paper so you can go on vacation?
Yeah. And I mean, that discovery piece is just so important, right? You've got to get in there and see
100%.
what it is on the ground. What are their particular challenges, issues, opportunities?
Well, especially because you're going with a mom and pop, right? So like your house is different than my house, is different than the neighbor's house, right? So like mom and pops, let's be honest, it's kind of run on a shoestring, and like whatever you could do to get stuff out the door so you could get money coming in. So everybody's got their own sort of weirdness, their own sort of intricacies that you've got to glaze over or fix. And I mean, even regionally, right? Like I work a lot in the South. And so, I'll tell you, maintenance departments are my favorite. Not just because I'm mechanical engineering, but because I love curmudgeon old men. And I swear to you, like, in order to be a maintenance man, I think you have to be a curmudgeon old man. And I just love talking to those guys, because if you talk to them, a lot of reasons why they're curmudgeon is because people aren't valuing what they bring to the table. And all you got to do is sit there and listen. And my God, yeah, curmudgeon old man talks your ear off for the next 2 hours, right? So just listening, because most people tell you exactly what they need. And no two clients are the same, but most of them will tell you. And you could walk into a facility on, 2 hours later, walk out, you'll know what the issues are.
If somebody wanted to pretend to be you, right? There's people listening and like, yeah, Katie sounds great. She knows her thing. I'm going to go down, listen to the floor staff, and go kind of implement some sort of process improvement project on their own and give that a try, what kind of advice would you have for that person?
So the first key is setting up a sustainable foundation. And in my head, that is, let's say you've got a couple of key employees, right, that you use for a critical piece of equipment. If you, do they run the equipment all the same way, right? And how do they know how to run it?
Wow,
What was
that's
that?
really interesting, right? Because and I know the one trick, and
Yeah,
and you did not know that, and Alex does it this, and if only we all put our tricks together.
exactly. Then we'd have a trick pony. But so in reality, it's, do you have all of your processes written down? And there's no magic in writing them down. The magic is in standardizing the process. And a lot of times you bring in those three key people or however many it is, and you brainstorm and I have found the most interesting things out of these. So if you have, a fleet of filler operators or people who are all qualified on the filler who know how to run the filler, and you put them in a room and you're like, great, we're going to write a conversion SOP. And each one of them, I swear, is going to have a slightly different way to do it. And it's like, okay, cool. So, and if you can't come to a synonymous, like one way resolution, great. Let's SMED it, right? So single minute exchange of die, which is a time study, right? So great, we'll do it your way today, Peter. We'll do it Alex's way tomorrow, and we'll do it my way on Wednesday. Fastest wins. And then that's how we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, at this point, whatever, all three of us have been pulled off the line, right? We've just we've triple staffed a line for 3 days, and I guess the plea to management, or what they have to be comfortable with, is it's going to be a little slower for now. And yeah, the kids are going to get peanut butter and jam all over the counter. But a week from now, think of what that's going to look like in the future. So they have to have some space for that.
Well, and a lot of what, to be honest, my role is determining or finding the way to create the data to support the changes, right? So return on investment. If your conversions take 8 hours or your conversions take 4 hours, you just got 4 hours back on every single conversion. So, and how many conversions do you do a year? Do you do a conversion a week? Okay, so 200 hours back a year. That's what you just got back.
Yeah.
Like, pays for itself.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. So kind of circling back on, you mentioned ERP deployments being one of the things that can sometimes come out of these improvement projects. I guess one question would be, like, for you, are there certain prerequisites, or are there certain things that a company should have in place before commencing that kind of a project or undertaking?
Like an ERP project specifically? So you kind of hit on it. Yeah, no, not everybody is ready. So you need to have enough staff to actually warrant it, right? Like, okay, so you can manage, right? What is ERP? It's like Excel on super duper steroids, right? So if you only have a staff of 2, you probably don't need an ERP system. Now, if you have multiple people adding data to the pot, and you've got people in shipping and batching and manufacturing, bottling, all these different things, you want every single person to own their area and add that data into the system so that you can then pull the data from the system and not require, that one person to go hunt and peck for it. So the prerequisite to me would be basically the size of the business would warrant that. Because if I'm running this out of my garage with an Excel sheet, no, I don't need an ERP system.
I mean, we can see, right? If it's the three of us running a thing, it's like, oh, I see we're low on sugar. I'm like, Katie, grab some sugar. You're like, no.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'll get some at the store. Come on. Yeah, don't overcomplicate it, right? Like, that's the other thing people like to do is they're like, oh, process improvement. We're going to improve the shit out of this process. And they just make it so complicated. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, stupid, right? That's always the phrase. So ERP systems are supposed to make it simple. If it makes it more complex, then you don't need it yet.
So one of the things that we usually see, so when people commence an ERP project, it's often because they're in pain in one or two areas, right? So it'll be, we don't know what our inventory is and our planning is a mess and we want to get our planning under control.
Right.
We've got all these paper
Or I
quality
can't control my
records.
cost.
Right, exactly. or we know we're going to be doing this GMP audit and our quality records are a mess. So there's various reasons for that.
Yep.
But so they do the ERP implementation, and then oftentimes when they're finished, they circle back and it's like, okay, now because things are system oriented, I'm collecting all of this data that I wasn't before, and I have all of these reports available to me, and it's like, in fact, it's like infinite compared to their actual ability to process that data and use it. And so this is where we get into KPIs, right?
Well, and even what you just hit on is these people who want to protect their jobs, right? You just created this huge gap of data that's no longer being analyzed. So where does the manpower for that come? Well, it comes from the people who are no longer like becoming the filler experts, right? You give them the ability to start working on data.
Yes, exactly. And so, and so often companies turn back on this and say, okay, I've got all this data, and what do I do with it, right? And to your point, the same people who were collecting the data can now process it, but it can still be overwhelming. Do you have like a favorite KPI or like a favorite by department, or like what would you say is like, okay, now that I'm collecting all kinds of data and I've got the time to work with it, where would we start in terms of saying, okay, here's what we want to analyze, and here's where we're going to get some like deep knowledge and actionable knowledge from?
So it's definitely client specific. However, my favorite ones, and this is generally like most people have this. First off, when you're setting KPIs do not get set by the floor, right? So key performance indicators, those are your big guys, right? So those are the top of the umbrella. Those should be set by the owners of the business, the stakeholders, whoever, right? And then from those couple, and there should not, like, the KPIs should not fill up a binder, right? This should be like 3 to 5 originally, like when you're starting out, right? Don't make it so many things that this is overwhelming and you never come back to it. And then what feeds into the KPIs would be PIs, process indicators. That's where you have a bunch more. So it's once again, pyramid structure, right? So PIs are going to be owned by people on the floor level and middle management, and those feed into KPIs. So my favorites always have to do with cost, because money always talks, right? You don't go into business to lose money. Those are called nonprofits. So most of the people that I work for are not nonprofits, right? And then improving time, anything that's a time saver, because time is money, right? And so I was always trained that for any process that involves a filler, when the filler's not running, you're not making money. And the goal is always to keep the filler running.
So for those process, the PIs, the process indicators on the filler side, it's like downtime would be your key.
Yeah, so you could do downtime. It could be conversion time. It could be ramp up time, right? Like, let's say you convert really well, but you ramp up like shit. Well, then you didn't convert well. Scrap rate, right? And a lot of these, I love to tie back with the operator and have their buy-in on what they are, because my God, there's so much low-hanging fruit and so much opportunity, right, for improvement generally, because you haven't improved anything. So like you're starting like at nothing, like, man, you're about to look like a superstar. Yeah, exactly. But you show them how it adds value to their life, right? Like, people don't necessarily mind. A lot of times I find they don't mind converting, but the ramp up, which is after converting back into full production, is so painful that they're just like, fuck, man, I do, like, they want to make that conversion last to the end of their shift so the next shift can ramp up. Or scrap rates, right? Like, do I want to shovel 3 hoppers of cans in my shift? Or what if I could get down to a third, right? Like, I want to be easy. Like, I want things to be easy when I go in.
Exactly. So, I mean, now I love what you just said about the pyramid structure and the KPIs leading to the PIs. And that, I think, in large part answers my next question, but there might be a bit more under the hood. So I'm going to kind of ask it, which is, when you've got your KPIs, how do you move from KPIs and seeing, okay, here's some information and maybe I can spot a problem now or an opportunity, but like, how do I action it then? How do I get deep enough to actually do something about it, right? So like, for example, people with, once they've got the system rolled out, all of a sudden they've got great data on COGS, right? I've got the labor in there. I've got,
I can see their
the
scrap
freight
rate,
costs. I
Yeah,
see the
scrap's
scrap rate.
killing
which
us.
always seem to surprise them.
Yeah. I've got all that data, or maybe I've got better quality data, so I know what my first pass, approval rate is. I know how often I have to do reworks and adjustments in batches. Okay, and I see that's a problem, right? So, but like, it feels like, I think to a lot of
How do you
people,
action that?
how do I action it? And like, who do I put, like, it feels like I need sometimes Sherlock Holmes to come in here and like figure out like how to go from somebody's dead, but like who did it and how do I fix it? Is there like,
Exactly.
what kind of approach would you recommend for people on that?
Yeah. So, I have my background is lean manufacturing training, and so something called MCRS, Management Control Reporting System. What that means is the frequency with which you meet, right? So like look at an annual calendar, and to be honest, it can't even just be annualized because there might be meetings that you have at a 3 or a 5 year frequency, but it's basically all the meetings that you have and what is discussed in those meetings. And primarily what needs to be discussed in those meetings are KPIs or PIs that feed into the KPI. So when you are looking at those, you're not establishing them. At this point, these are established and you are setting parameters to which at past this threshold, there is action. And who is then responsible for the action, right? So if you've got, a batching team and then a packaging team and then a shipping team, right? And my frozen plan attainment is not where it needs to be, right? So that's probably a collective one. But what PIs are feeding into that? So you basically have, your top managers that are saying, hey, we've got a problem with this KPI. These are the 4 PIs that it's got a problem with. You guys need to go work with your respective teams and figure out how to fix these. Then my assumption, what I would recommend is that those middle managers then go to the floor, work with those people and say, okay, so all of our conversions are taking 20% longer than they should. What's going on? And then the operators even have their own, I call them personal PIs, pips, because they sound cute. And like, how can you be mad at a pip? So they track their own personal PIs, but you force them as a middle manager to report back out to you, right? So you help them create literally, it's like so basic. It's a piece of paper with like a grid on it and certain frequency checks. It could be a daily check, it could be an hourly check, whatever that is. And you put them once again in partnership with somebody else who may have the resources to help them, like a maintenance guy or something else. And then every week you meet with those people and you're like, okay, so our conversions are still 20% longer than they should be. What is going on? Well, I've had this particular example. Well, if I had no-go gauges to set up the filler height, then I could actually convert the filler in half the time. Okay, what does that cost? $36 in Delrin plastic. Maintenance guy 2, hey, order the plastic, then machine them and let's roll. Like, you got any problems with this? And he's like, no, hell no, because then I don't have to go out there and help them set the height. Like, that's where you just drive all that down. But you have to create, once again, it always goes back to sustainable foundation. MCRS is sustainable foundation.
When you go into companies that have tried to do this themselves and the project has failed, these like continuous improvement projects have failed, is that process and that system, do you feel that kind of like unjams it? Because when you're there, they're paying you, right? It's like, hey, we're paying Katie. We got to like keep this moving, please.
And I'm loud. Like, let's be honest. Like, I mean, I get the ears of the right people and I don't generally take barriers. So you cannot build improved processes on quicksand. You have to create a sustainable foundation. But sustainable foundations are not sexy, right? They are basic. They are the same every single day. You come in, you do the same stuff. You have the same routine. If I came into, I will have to say that there's a couple of companies that I worked for that had multiple facilities everywhere. And you could go to a facility in Georgia and then a facility in California, and they had the exact same meeting schedule. So I knew that 8:30 a.m. Monday morning, we had a general ops meeting. So they had all the same things. So I mean, it's not pretty, it's not sexy, it's not flashy, it's the basics, right? Like that's where we all fall down on the basics.
I think that's probably a good place to segue into a kind of a question, which is, obviously when people bring you in, right, you add huge value, everything we've just discussed. But like you said, the costs are high bringing in outside consulting. How can companies look to graduate from an outside consultant like yourself to continuing this work once you're gone, right? Like at what point can you take your hands away and see that system that you've been working on with them continues unaided?
So my aim and my goal whenever I go work with anybody is that I am not your knight in shining armor. I am not the person you call in the middle of the night. I am going to give you the tools to do the work to fix yourself. Now, do I have a lot of things that'll expedite so we can get to the end zone a lot quicker? Heck yeah. But I am enabling you and showing you the foundation, and then you and the skeleton, you're going to put the meat on it.
You come in and the field is ripe with, with stuff to change and improvements. As the low-hanging fruit gets taken care of, how should companies start thinking about, hey, we've been doing this for a few years now. What do we do now in terms of finding areas for improvement? Is that KPI driven from senior management?
For sure.
Yeah.
So I would say first, a lot of people who think they're like, oh, we've been doing this for 5 years, we know everything. Yeah, I'm going to challenge you on that. I bet you don't. And my test for that is if somebody goes out on vacation for a month, what happened? Like, does everything fall apart? And I don't mean like the guy you hired last week that, cleans bathrooms. I mean, like one of your key employees leaves and is out for a month, right? Because we're all humans, right? And we all so that things happen. So if that person leaves for a month, then what? And if the then what is we continue business as usual, there's no hiccups, there's no problems, cool. Let's look for bigger and badder things to improve. If the answer is, which is generally the answer, right? Like I get this like sheepish look like, oh, no, that can't happen. Oh my gosh, no. If Bob leaves, like we will, all hell will break loose. Then we need to work on setting up a sustainable foundation. We need to be able to plug and play people wherever, because we have the actual support system so that, knowledgeable Julie can come in and maybe she didn't run the filler yesterday, but if she has any questions, she's got resources and she knows where to go to get the information.
Fantastic. Do you have more questions?
No, this is great. Yeah.
Katie, where can people like the cut of your jib? I'm sure. Where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, although don't laugh at my picture. At one point I had red hair. No more. Well, I now live in Florida and Florida is not kind to redheads. So
they do let you change that. You can
state.
Change your picture if you so choose.
What? No, I know that. I have an aversion to social media. It's not a real aversion, although I might try to get it categorized. But you can find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, Katie at mkdcollective.com. And that's Katie spelled Katie.
Perfect. We'll make sure to put it in the description. Katie, thank you so much for being with us. What a pleasure. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today on the Better Batch podcast. If you're looking to improve your manufacturing, reach out and we'll see if we can help.